Let's go to Miranda Devine now, the opinion writer at the Daily Telly. And Miranda, thanks so much, as always. Your newspaper,
Pleasure.
I tell you what, it's right in the firing line this morning. And Bill Shorten, his response in terms of his statement, Labor repudiating the report in the front page of the Telly, accused of gutter journalism, all sorts of attacks against the paper this morning. What do you say in response to that?
Well, I think they protest too much. The fact is that all we've done on the front page is point out a glaring omission from Bill Shorten's own narrative that he's put forward into the election campaign about his mother. And he's done it repeatedly, and he's left out a big chunk. And, we don't mean any disrespect by pointing it out, that he's sort of airbrushed away a big segment of his mother's life. He's pretended that she was just a teacher and that she wanted more than anything to do better and to become a lawyer. She would have loved to have become a lawyer, etc., etc. Now, that all sounds very plausible until you find out that she was a lawyer, and not only was she a lawyer, she went to the bar and she was very well respected. So he's left that out of his life story, just like he's conveniently overlooks the fact that he went to one of the most prestigious schools in the country. So on the one hand, to be posing as this kind of working class boy made good, and on the other hand, airbrushing out his real life, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. I mean, it's something to be proud of that his mother achieved so much. But don't leave out half the story if you're pretending to show your true self to the voter. And really, we're making an enormous decision in 10 days' time, and Bill Shorten's doing all he can to keep his own character and his own policies and their costings as opaque as possible.
Miranda, I've been told this morning by Liberals within the coalition that some of their internal research midway through this campaign has showed that they still have a lingering problem when it comes to their perception, when it comes to the treatment of women in particular. This is in terms of they're still alienating women voters, and the campaign hasn't lured some of those women back. This is interesting to note. Why do you think that is? And in the context of the campaign launch being this Sunday, expect to hear from perhaps Jenny Morrison or even Scott Morrison's own mum on Mother's Day.
Look, I don't think that the polls bear out that thesis. In fact, I think Scott Morrison, you'll find in a number of polls, does very well with women. So I don't know where that comes from. I think women voters have warmed to him and that there's no difference in women voters when it comes to the coalition or with Labor. In fact, you might assume that Bill Shorten does have a woman problem because he's constantly surrounding himself with women, with his own wife, Chloe Shorten. You saw on Sunday also with Penny Wong and Tanya Plibersek, even Catherine King he was promoting ahead of the male members of his team like Anthony Albanese or Chris Bowen, the Treasurer, who you would imagine would be the second most important person. But no, he surrounds himself with women. So I don't really buy that story that there's a woman problem. I think it's something that was promoted by Julia Banks and various other disaffected people after the Malcolm Turnbull coup, but I don't really think that it's true.
Miranda, in my column today, in our 2600 Sky News newsletter, I've looked at what the Morrison cabinet would look like if they pull off an upset win. One of the things I've suggested is that Ben Morton, who's a former WA State Director, is a member for Tangi, and as you know, he's travelling with the Prime Minister, basically been on the plane with him the whole time. He's one of the Prime Minister's closest confidants, certainly the most trusted, I think, within the Parliament, and he will be promoted to the ministry is one thing I point out. The other thing is Matthias Cormann, there's been some speculation that if the Liberals do win, that he would want to move on to something else. I don't think that's the case. I think he sees it as a badge of honour that he's been in finance and one of the key figures in terms of their economic management over the last 6 years, and he doesn't want that to change. If they do, as unlikely as it looks at the moment, according to the polls and the bookies, if they win on the 18th of May.
Yeah, it's really fascinating looking at a future Morrison cabinet because, of course, it'll be his opportunity if he does pull off this upset win. It'll be his opportunity to really put his mark on the government. He will then be Prime Minister in his own right, and he will have that mandate to create the team around him that he really chooses rather than one that he inherits. So you're absolutely right. Ben Moreton has become an invaluable member of the Prime Minister's team, and as you say, he's travelling with him all the time. And you'll probably see Arthur Sinodinos, who's also up from his sickbed and looking hale and hearty, and he's also been front and centre there with the Prime Minister.
Indeed.
So you'll probably see him with a big role, and he was a big loss, I think, to the Abbott government when he became sick.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't it good to see him looking so well? I mean, this could all be an academic argument after the 18th of May if the Liberals and the Coalition don't win. But just on that internal research that I talked about just a little earlier, Miranda, also I found it really interesting that I'm told that the leadership issue isn't really an issue for the Liberals. So the Turnbull dumping issue seems to have washed through the electorate and it's not showing up in some of their track polling and track focus groups.
That's really interesting. It's something that Scott Morrison says quite a lot, that people have now come to see leadership changes as just the new normal, which is pretty sad. But I suppose it's just to be expected after the last decade of chopping and changing. Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten have made a virtue of the fact that both their parties have tried to put a stop to that by saying that there's a much higher barrier before you can actually knock off an elected Prime Minister, which is a good thing. Of course, that doesn't apply to opposition leaders. So whether or not, if the coalition does go into opposition, whether or not they then go through more turmoil as they decide who's going to lead them into opposition, who's to know?
And finally, Miranda, 1.15 million people have already voted. That's quite the turnout, isn't it, with a week and a half to go?
Yeah, it's incredible. I don't, frankly, myself understand it. I think that the whole beauty of an election campaign is that sort of excitement on the Saturday that you go out there and you vote, and it's sort of a civic duty and you're doing it with all your neighbours and friends. I guess maybe a lot of people are working, so they need to do that, or maybe they're playing sport or something. But it just seems to be like opening a Christmas present before Christmas. I don't really know why so many people do it, but obviously it's a thing. I do think it's a bit of a worry, though, because people are missing out on those crucial last few days when an election can really turn.
Absolutely. And as someone with a birthday on Christmas Eve, Miranda and Kieran, I can tell you that I completely condone opening presents before Christmas. That's how it happens. But I take your point on pre-polls as well. Perhaps there'll be a review because it seems to be bipartisan. That's certainly what Kayla Murnane said yesterday from the New South Wales perspective. But Miranda, we'll have to leave it there. Good to see you.